started. Welcome to the Faith Forum podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you. So, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm originally from Florida. I moved to Indiana about 10 years ago. I was kind of, really deep into sin and was not walking with Jesus at all. I was in the service industry for over 20 years. And, when you get off work at 12 o'clock in the morning, the only thing to do is go to bars. And I dove into that lifestyle kind of head first. And I was circling the drain at 32 years old. And one night God woke me up out of a sound sleep and was just like, it's time to go. You're not going to make it if you stay. I found a map of the United States. I closed my eyes and stuck my finger on it and landed here. And 6 weeks later, I lived in a completely different state. I didn't know anybody. I changed my name and decided to get my act together. And it was a slow walk towards, going back to church and like finding God and kind of finding what the solution to the things that I had going on was. But I felt this kind of pull to go to church and ended up at Calvary, which is, they have a Calvary back in Florida where I lived, and I recognized the name because when you live in the Bible Belt and there's churches on every corner, it's hard to decide where to start when you don't have any frame of reference. So I just walked in the door and I've never walked away since. So.
Wow. Okay. So let me get this straight. So you were not a Christian, but
No.
you had grown up in a church?
No, I went to my mom sent me to a Christian preschool, and then she took me to a Lutheran church. I was baptized Lutheran up until about middle school, and then I just, I wasn't interested. I thought it was sort of boring, and I wanted to play sports and hang out with my friends. And my parents were kind of like, we wanted you to have a foundation and know what God was, and then if you were interested, you'd stay, and if you weren't, then we weren't going to force you. They weren't really. They were Christians in that they believed in God, but they didn't like follow that path at all. They just kind of, went about daily life as most people do, sort of indifferent. And then I went just completely the other way and just started getting in all kinds of trouble and just living a very kind of wild life. So I really didn't have I'm just now, about halfway, a little more than halfway through reading the Bible for the first time. And
Oh, wow.
I'm just kind of learning all this, which I'm really actually glad that I came to it later in life, because all of the wonder and awe of the Bible is like, it's all new to me. So I'm just like, tell me more, I want to know everything. And I'm so excited. And I'm not complacent in my faith because I didn't grow up hearing these stories to where I'm just like, yeah, I've heard it all, but now I'm just hearing it all for the first time, and it's just been amazing to see, how God moves from a different set of eyes than maybe a child would have looked at it.
Wow. Yeah. So that was a huge step of faith then, for like stepping out of your whole life and moving to a new place like that.
Yeah.
Uh, like what was on your mind in that process?
I think I knew that I really truly believed that I was going to die probably if I stayed where I was. I was doing a lot of drugs, and I was, kind of partying and sort of, getting with different people. And I just wasn't following anybody. And I would go to my friends who were all married, their kids' birthday parties, and they'd make me sit at the kids' table because I was the only unmarried woman there. And I was just going like in a completely wrong direction. I was like Peter Pan and not just refusing to grow up. And then, fentanyl was getting to be, starting introduced into club culture and things like that. And there were people just dropping like flies around me. And I just, so I really felt like God just woke me up and was like, you need to go. You will not make it if you stay. And I had nothing to lose. I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. I didn't have a career, so to speak. So it didn't matter where I went, really. So Indiana was as good as anywhere else as far as I was concerned. And I just, like nothing was changing where I was, and I knew something had to change or I wasn't going to make it. So, but it was honestly the best. I mean, the scariest. I'd never left home. I mean, I never left Florida before. So it was to come somewhere where you didn't know anybody and the culture was so different. Like I had to change my entire wardrobe because the clothes that were appropriate in Florida are not appropriate in northern Indiana. You know, like, people are a lot more modest in their fashion here.
Mm.
And just being around a different type of people. Midwestern people are just some of the most honest and kind people, in my opinion. We're close enough to Chicago that, like, if I needed to get out and get, into the city, I could. But now, even when I go to Chicago, I'm like, I want to get back to my get back to my small little town. I love it here. So it was. It ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me, honestly.
Okay. And how long ago was that now that you made that
Uh,
shift?
10 years ago in July.
Oh,
Yeah,
congrats.
yeah. Thank you. It's been awesome.
Did you have any addiction with that transition?
In the beginning, and I think it's easy to just move, getting up and moving to a different place doesn't change the problems at your core. So initially, like, the people I gravitated to were the troublemakers. I still
Mm,
could only get a job in the restaurant business, so I found myself kind of sliding right back into old habits. And
mm,
then that was when I started feeling a tug to go to church, and
mm,
that was when I went to Calvary for the first time, and I heard contemporary Christian music for the first time. Which, when I start talking about Light the Way, I'll get more into that. But it was very transformative. But I wasn't fully ready to, like, dive in. I thought if I started going to church that I'd have to change everything about myself, and, like,
mm,
things that I just wasn't ready to let go of.
mm.
And So it was a slow transition into my faith walk. I only got baptized 3 years ago, 4 years ago now,
Mm.
so it hasn't been terribly long.
Yeah. Um, okay. Well, that's an amazing like turnaround, and it just sounds like God's hand it was on that change.
He had really, really big plans for me, and
Mm,
I have so many stories since that happened of him doing things like that with me, that
mm,
sometimes it's, like, hard to look back the last 10 years and be like, this is really what happened. If people who didn't see it happen in real time, I would feel like I was making the whole thing up because it just sounds like unreal. But he
mm,
had a plan for me, and he was just moving his little chess pieces around to get me where he needed me to be to do what I'm doing now.
mhm. Yeah. What was your conception of God when you felt God, or like before you felt God telling you to leave Florida? What was your conception of God?
I knew that God existed. I wasn't that I didn't believe in Jesus. I just thought that I had gone so far away from him that he
Mm,
wouldn't want anything to do with me. I
mm,
didn't, I was like, I would see Christians come in on Sunday to the restaurant I worked at after church, and they were just so happy, and I was so miserable at my core. And I
mm,
had suffered a lot of trauma in my life, and I was just covering up all these bullet holes with band-aids of, like, drugs and alcohol and sex and all the things that I thought were supposed to make me feel better. It never occurred to me to even try God until much, much later. But I just saw him as, somebody who was very strict and wanted you to do things his way, and only if you behaved a certain way and were perfect would he want you with him. Because it seemed like everybody that was Christian to me, because I didn't know a lot of Christians at the time, they just seemed happy and perfect, and like everything was great. And I clearly didn't know him at all. It was a very, very large misconception of who he is and who he likes to roll with.
okay. Um, so now you find yourself doing worship ministry, right?
Yeah. Who'd have saw that coming?
Yeah. Did you grow up playing instruments or?
I mean, I was in band, but I more enjoyed singing, but music has always just been in my bones. When I'm sad, when I'm happy, when I'm just needing to relax or think or write, I like to write. And I would turn on music, and music is how I related to my parents. We had certain singers, and we would go, and my dad and I would do karaoke together, and my sister was a singer, so it was always music was always in our house. And I love every type of music. I had no specific genre that I was really a fan of. If the song made me feel something, then I liked it. And I think that that's kind of why this form of ministry really appealed to me. But this was never my idea at all
Mm.
to do this. At all. I'm glad I'm doing it now.
So your primary instrument is your voice, is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't even know that I would say it's a great instrument, but it's certainly used a lot. My daughter likes it. So
There you go.
yeah. And I sing in the choir at church now.
Mm,
And my friends, like, I would never try to even, it never would even occur to me to try to do anything like professional with it. I got,
mm,
I helped at our first worship event. One of the Lutheran churches we partnered with they didn't have a worship band. They're an old school Lutheran church, so they sing hymnals out of the book and with the congregation. But they wanted
mhm,
to contribute something musically, so I got pulled into that just to like give them something to offer. But that was
mm.
probably the most of that you'll ever see. You could ever see. So I leave that
Yeah.
to the professionals.
Okay. Um, so so what is Light the Way ministry?
So, Light the Way, it is a compilation of different churches of all different denominations. Um,
Okay.
it is we host worship events in at public parks, usually in downtown areas where we can catch a lot of fish for men, and we host these events and we bring together all these different churches that don't know each other, have nothing to do with each other, and we kind of encourage them to work together to put on a worship concert.
Mm,
And they and in addition to that, we're using it to evangelize and to get out there and spread the gospel message and to spread Jesus around our communities. But we're also, the third part of that is we also use our events to highlight nonprofit organizations that do really great work in our community and around the world,
mm,
and we shine a light on them, which provides resources for people that are coming to our events who need help. Because most of the people that come to us, they need some kind of, whether they're struggling with homelessness, hunger, infertility. We have adoption services that come and hang out with us. We have
mm,
drugs and alcohol addiction, trauma, PTSD, things like that. We have different nonprofit organizations that support all of those types of needs. So it allows for people to find resources. It allows for those organizations to find volunteers and financial supporters, and just to
mm.
like let the community know that they're out there. Because a lot of people, if you aren't specifically looking for something, you don't even know what exists in your own town. So
Right.
it gives us an opportunity to do that too.
Okay. Uh, so how many events do you guys host per year, would you say?
Well, this just started last year. So our first one was actually
Okay.
in June, and then we did another one in October. The June one, I'm going to back up. It was inspired by the Asbury revival in Kentucky. I was watching it on social media, scrolling, just amazed at what was happening over there. And I was sitting in my living room. It was like 4 o'clock in the morning, and I was just like, I wish something like that would happen here. And almost audibly, I heard a voice say, "You're gonna do it." And I haven't. I own an in-home daycare. I don't know anything about events. I've never in my life thought I would do something like that. But God has blessed me so much and saved me from so much that like I couldn't say no. So I just was like, okay, let's go. So I went online and I started kind of reaching out and saying, like, if this is something I wanted to do, how do I do this? Where do I start? And a
Mm,
couple local pastors saw my post on our local community page, and they reached out to me, and one kind of guided me in the direction of churches she thought would work with me. Another one, kind of told me like how to approach it with the town. And
mm,
through these connections, I started making friends, and then and it kind of just boiled over, which was a cool story in and of itself. But that, so we did the first one. We're like, oh, okay, we're done. Like that was awesome. It was amazing. We had 800 people show up. We had
mhm,
7 worship teams, and it was just a fantastic event. And then my husband and I were talking about it after church one day, and he's like, I keep hearing do it in the fall, like on a loop whenever you talk about your event. And my husband is a very stoic person. He does not hear voices. Like for him to say something like that, I was like, that's really odd. And he's
Mm,
like, can you do it in the fall? I'm like, I don't know. Like, we just finished doing this. I don't think I can turn around and ask him to do it again. He's like, I
mm,
think you need to. So 4 months later, we did it again. And
mm,
this time people came out in like 30-degree weather, like 600 people, even though there was three other really large community events happening at the same time. And we all froze to death together. But um, we got out there, and we did it in October. So then um, it kind of seemed like it wasn't going away. And this time it was more about the focus became more about the nonprofits. So even though we had 5 worship teams this time, that we had 15 nonprofits. We went from 5 to 15. And
mm.
God really was like, I need you to point to these people. So we did. And now this year we're doubling down and we're doing 4. And so we have a gala coming up March 23rd. Valparaiso University, which is the college in this town, they gave me their chapel for the
Oh,
night, which is like 800 people seating chapel. It's gorgeous. And we're going to do a fundraiser to help offset the cost because my family and I, we pay for these events ourselves and we're not wealthy people. We live paycheck to paycheck like most other people do.
mm,
And these are, I mean, they're expensive. Some of these parks just to rent, like one is like $1,300 just to rent the park for the day.
mm.
So it adds up quick when you start getting into like marketing and all the hoopla that comes with it. So we're doing that one, and then we have 3 more. We have Portage May 18th, Chesterton July 19th, and Valparaiso, downtown Valparaiso, which is like the big city in this area. We're doing that October 5th. So and then next year, we're hoping to get in and do prison ministry and do a
Okay.
worship event in the prison.
Yeah,
And then do a 24-hour tent service is what God is kind of pushing us towards next year. So every year it's something different. We're letting Him sort of lead, and we're kind of just along for the ride.
that's awesome. Wow. So I I'm not very familiar with the Asbury revival. Can you explain it a little bit more?
So at Asbury College in Kentucky last year,
Yeah.
they had a church service that just didn't end for
Yeah.
days and days. And it was crazy. And then it was like that was like the pop off, and then little revivals started sort of popping off all over the place. And
Mm,
I just was, Chesterton is a relatively small town. Valparaiso, it's bigger, but it's not like anything anybody from a city would consider a city. It's still, pretty small town, and it's about an hour outside of Chicago,
okay.
in Northwest Indiana. So things like that. I mean, our individual churches put on worship nights. My church does it, I think, like 4 times a year, and then we do one, in the downtown area. And so all these churches do their own thing, but nobody gets together. No, like they don't share, they're very concerned about their own, sort of siloed buildings, but they
Mm,
don't share their resources and share their ideas. And so I think that
mm,
as a new creation, I don't understand that, because in when we get to heaven, we're not going to be put into little factions based on what denomination we are. And it's not to say that denominations aren't important. Everybody worships and prays and has little different beliefs in their dogma or whatever, but
mm,
we are all going to be one people. We all are one body of Christ. This is, and maybe this is my ignorance, and because I haven't finished reading the Bible, maybe it gets more into this later, but to me it just doesn't make sense. The world is going in a really horrible direction, and if we are going to make it, because we're going to be persecuted, we are persecuted now, it seems like it makes more sense for us to be together. So it's like the way it's kind of like an arc of sorts. Like I'm just collecting churches and being like, come in, be with me, be together. Like this matters more than whatever you guys got going on individually. We need to be together. We have to save as many people as we can, and that's going to take a lot more than one person or one church. So
mm. Okay. Yeah, no, I agree. That's awesome. Yeah. So when you decided to start this ministry, uh, what were the like steps that you took to like make it happen?
I didn't make any of it happen. It sounds I'm not I it might sound humble or kind of ridiculous, but I really didn't do much. I the joke has been that I'm here for permits and paperwork, and that God is really here to do the rest, and He really was. I mean, when we
Mm,
did the first event, I had nothing. When I went and sought advice from somebody in leadership at a church, they were like, "I don't think this is a good idea because
mm,
this takes a team of people almost a year to plan an outdoor event like this. It takes
mhm,
thousands and thousands of dollars in equipment that you don't have, musicians you don't have, like the resources you don't have. You don't have anything that you need." And I was like, "Ooh, but I have God." Like it's like I do, but I don't need to because He does. And like He said, do it. So I'm doing it. And I'm just expecting and leaning into that. Like He is going to provide the rest because He told me
mhm,
to do this, so He's going to give me the things I need to do it. So I didn't listen because I don't. And so and He picked the right person, I think, because He knew that I would obey Him. And
mm,
so he when I went to do it, there came a day where my husband was like, "We need sound equipment. Like we you know, you got these churches, you got the park, like what are we doing about sound equipment?" And I was like, "I don't know. Like it's going to show up though. I just know it is." That
mm,
very same day, one of the churches I had reached out to maybe like a month before finally got back to me, and he asked me some questions. We got off the phone, and then he called me back and he's like, "Oh, I forgot to tell you, we're not only gonna perform, we're gonna bring all the sound and tech equipment, and like we're gonna run tech for you. So we got you." And that was the end of that conversation. And I was
mm,
like, "Shut up." And I just like dropped to my knees. And then when we went to get, this is gonna sound nuts, but we went to get to approach the town to get the permit to do it. And they asked me if I had insurance, and I obviously, how would I know that I needed insurance because I've never done anything like this. So I was like, "I don't have insurance." They're like, "Who's your sponsor?" I said, "Me. I'm paying for all of this." And they're like, you need to find a sponsor." And I'm like, "Well, I don't want a sponsor because I didn't want somebody to tell me what I could or couldn't do or to kind of dictate. I didn't want it to become a business thing. Like God was like, this needs to belong to all the churches, so you can't have a church as your sponsor. It cannot belong to one church because then people are going to hone in on that and be like, "Oh, it's a Lutheran event or it's a Catholic event or whatever." So it couldn't belong to a church. I didn't want it to belong to a business. I didn't know what I was going to do. So I was praying about it. My daughter had been in the bath. I put her on the couch. I'm like, "I'm going to run upstairs, grab some laundry, come back." And when I came back, her face had blown up like she'd been stung by multiple bees in the eye area. And I panicked and I gave her antihistamine. She wasn't responsive. She was happy. She was smiling. She didn't seem bothered by this, but she looked like Quasimodo. She looked absolutely crazy. And so I take her to the ER. They give her an exam. There's nothing in her eye. But she's not responding to their medication either. She's still smiling and happy. And so the next day, I call a girlfriend of mine who owns an optometry practice, and I said, "Melissa, I know your office is always busy, but something happened to Aria's eye. Can I please bring her in?" She said, "You know what's weird? All my appointments canceled today." She goes, "I don't know why, but like every single appointment this morning canceled." She goes, "Go ahead and bring her." So I rush her over. She does the exam. There's nothing in her eye. She goes, "Well, obviously she looks nuts, but there's nothing there." So, and she doesn't seem unhappy about it. She's like, "So just monitor it." She said, "How's your worship event going?" I was like, "I don't know." I said, I need to find a sponsor. And I told her all my feelings about that. And she's just jokingly says like, "Doolin Family Eye Care presents Light the Way Night of Worship." She goes, "I like the way that sounds." I was like, "Yeah, you want to be my sponsor?" And she's just like laughed it off. And I left. About 5-10 minutes later, we're out to breakfast across the street from her office. She sends me a
mhm,
text message after you left. I called my insurance company. You have yourself a sponsor. I went to tell my daughter. I was like, "Oh my God, Aria!" And her face was completely back to normal, as if
wow.
whatever happened to her had never happened. And I
Huh,
took a picture of her and sent it back to Melissa. I get goosebumps every time I talk about it because I know I know God can do miracles. He has done so many miracles in my life that when I look back, I'm just like, how did you not believe sooner? But like, but I've never seen anything like that in real time. The
mhm,
way that she was instantaneously better, and
yeah.
my daughter just starts laughing at me like she was in on the joke the entire time. And I couldn't believe it. And but we had our sponsor. So
Yeah.
we like everything kind of came to us that way the first
Yeah.
time. And then the second time, nonprofits were kind of calling me out of nowhere and they're like, "Hey, heard you're doing something." I'm like, "From who?" You know, like they're like, "Doesn't matter. We want to come." So
Mm,
God's just sort of like, I mean, he really is just doing everything. He's opening doors and I just have to walk through them. So really all of it's kind of happening to me, not me pursuing it.
mm. Okay.
I don't know if that
That
answered your question. I went on a tangent. I'm sorry.
no, that is great. That is amazing to hear how God has been using you to make that happen.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're you're like a super faithful person, and God is just rewarding the faith that you are putting out there and just taking steps to follow His will. That is amazing.
Yeah, we're happy to do it. I mean, these this next round of events very costly. You know, with the park that we had been renting was only $150 for the day, so it was manageable for our family. But as we
Mm,
started moving into bigger cities and their parks, the parks were getting more expensive. But
mhm,
my husband and I, like I said, we don't have a lot of money, but we had our tax return coming. And
mhm,
I said to my husband, I'm like, I know we had other plans for this money and like to take care of things that we needed as a family, but like we need to rent these parks before the dates get taken. Like, are you willing to step out in faith with me that we need to pay for these parks with our money, even though it will leave us with nothing. Like we didn't even know how we were going to get groceries that week. We were just
yeah,
like, we need to take care of this now. And
mm,
he was, I mean, he's just been by my side. Even if he doesn't hear the things that I hear from God, he just knows that like he just supports me. And so
mm,
he said, okay, you know, do what you have to do. And that day I happened to be presenting at one of our church partners, the church that came with the equipment, to let them know about the gala and just kind of to thank them for their participation so far. And they ended up giving me the money for all of the parks that day. They handed me $2,300, and that
mm,
took care of the park rental for all of the parks and left us enough money that like we could use our money for groceries and
mm,
things that we needed to use it for. So it was very like Abraham and Isaac. Like God just wanted to see if Abraham would sacrifice his son, but he didn't need
mhm,
him to. So he was like, I just wanted to see if you would give me your money even though you needed it so bad. I just wanted to see if you give it to me, but I didn't actually need it. Here's your money. And it was so I know that I just continue to do what he needs me to do. And I know that he's going to provide on the back end somehow.
yeah, that's amazing. Huh. It it's not often that you hear stories like yours where it's like every step of the way it's like God is just right there making it happen. And that's really cool. You you moved to Northwest Indiana 10 years ago and you started attending a church there. Um, is that where you met your husband?
No, we met online about 4 months into moving here. He
Mm,
was getting out of a marriage, and he travels for work, so he's on the road all the time. And he had been living in hotels basically since he separated from his ex-wife, and and I needed a roommate because the person that I moved in with when I moved here, it just wasn't a great like living situation.
mhm,
So I needed a roommate. He needed a home base. And we're like, I know we just met, but you need this. I need this. Like, this would work because you're only home on the weekends. And we could get to know each other over the weekends. And if it doesn't work out as romantically, like we
mm,
could be roommates because I'm pretty easy to get along with. He's pretty easy to get along with. I'm like, we both felt like we were old enough and mature enough to be like, if it doesn't work out romantically, like you have a home base, I have a home, you're not home that much. Like, well, it'll work. But then it just I mean, obviously we're married now, so it did end up working out. And then we adopted our daughter. She's now 5.5. I almost said 6.5. She's now 5.5. We adopted her as a newborn, so we have
mm.
a child together. Um, and it's
Wonderful.
just he's such a good guy. And he was always a believer, but he definitely has gotten more into it, since all this happened. The way our daughter landed on in our life
mm,
really kind of was the final like nail in the coffin of like us like jumping into our faith, because that was, if you think the stories I've told you so far are God stories, she is a God story. Like that is
yeah.
like that doesn't even seem real at all.
How's that?
So okay, I'm glad you asked because I love telling the story and because it sounds so
Yeah.
nice. So I got fired from a management position when I was working for Chili's for
Okay.
being too nice, if you can believe that. I was like, who gets fired for being too nice? But they're like, well, people are going to see you as their peer, not as their boss. So they let me go. I took a job temporarily, and I worked with this woman who reminded me a lot of me when I lived in Florida. Um, well, she was my trainer. We worked. I gave her rides to and from work because she was like dealing drugs and she didn't have a car and she was just kind of like just in a rough place in her life, and I empathized with her because she reminded me of me back in the
Mm,
day, but she was older. So anyway, fast forward, she works there for 2 weeks. I work there for a month. We both go separate ways, but we stay connected on Facebook. At that time that I knew her, I was going through infertility problems
mm,
and sharing those with her on my car ride with her and stuff. So fast forward a year, um, I am I'm on the phone with my friend. She's finding out whether her child that she's pregnant with is going to be special needs, and she's
mm,
like, I don't know if I would want to continue with the pregnancy. I don't think I'm equipped to be a special needs parent.
mm,
And I was like, give it to me. I can't have kids. Give me the baby. Like if I'm your best friend, like I'll take care of it. I'll love it. Like don't get rid of it. You know, like
mm,
I could love that baby. And we hung up the phone. I get a call back, and I thought it was my girlfriend calling me, and it turns out it's the woman, the woman I had trained, that I knew
mm,
a year prior. She was at an abortion clinic
mm,
about to terminate a pregnancy from a wild one night stand on her 40th birthday.
mm,
And she said that she got sent a vision of my face during her
mm,
appointment. And so she stopped the appointment, went out into the hall, called me, and said, I know you can't have kids. I am pregnant and I don't want to be. So if you want this baby, come get me. So I went and picked her up. She was about
mm,
15 weeks in utero with my daughter. And she ended up letting us adopt the baby. Well, during the wait for that child, she never told us who the dad was initially, but she said that it was potentially this one guy that she was friends with, and he had a girlfriend. She was with somebody else, so like she never told him because she didn't want to make it like messy for him. So
mm,
while we were waiting for Aria to be born, I went to the hospital because I was bleeding out from the infertility problems I was having, and I went for a blood transfusion in the middle of the night, and there happened to be a car accident on my way in.
mm,
So when I got in there, they're like, "Hey, there was a car accident. The doctor's going to be busy. It's going to take a while to get to your room." And when I finally did get home, I got a call from the mother, and she's the birth mother, and she said she was bawling, and she's like, "Do you remember that guy I told you about that I had the one night stand with?" I was like, "Yeah." She goes, "He died in a car accident on 6th and 49. He was the
mm.
guy down the hall from me while I was
Wow.
in the hospital waiting for a baby he never knew he was having.
Mm,
So we were together when he died, and
mm,
I ended up adopting a baby he never knew about." And she looks neither of them look like me, but she looks exactly like me. it's it's so it's so weird. um
mm,
I ended up finding his family after she was a year old. I got the mom to tell me his name, and I found his family and I told them everything. So now they're a part of our lives too, so that she has that connection to her biological family.
mm,
And she gets to see, where her nose comes from, and so she doesn't have any questions. She knows all about this. But when I look back and see how God took me out of where I was to put me somewhere where I would meet that woman just long enough to meet her and establish a relationship so she knew I couldn't have kids, so that when she would get pregnant a year later,
mm,
that she would think of me and I would save a baby from being aborted, and it
mm,
would give me a child that I couldn't have, that I desperately wanted. And then my friend that was going to have a special thought she might have a special needs baby did end up having a special needs child, and she's the
mm.
best mom to that kid, and she's an advocate now for special needs kids with autism in Austin. So I
Wow.
just it's just cool to look back and see how God just like moves the chess pieces around. That's the only way I can think to say it. He really does. And I'm so blessed. And I think that experience and seeing how many things had to like lay exactly perfectly for us to have her,
Hmm.
and for her to come out looking exactly like me and acting exactly like me, like she was always going to be mine. And it's bittersweet because obviously that family lost their son, but they get to keep a piece of him through her, and we are open to having that relationship. So yeah, so that was kind of like, then me and my husband just looked at each other, we're like, we can't ever say no to God. Like that was, he just showed himself. Like
Yeah.
seriously. So we both got baptized. We both started just really like volunteering at church all the time, and
Mm.
I got into a Bible study group, and I just really dove into my faith at that point because I begged God on my hands and knees for a
Mm.
family the Christmas that I got here. I met my husband that Christmas day. So, and he has just been showing up for me ever since. So, here we are.
That's awesome. So, uh, what are some of the uh, challenges that you've seen um, in the church since moving to Indiana?
Well, I found that like there's a really like big churches that have like thousands of people and tons of money and resources, and
Mhm.
everybody talks about them, and and then there's these small churches that have 30 people maybe. I mean, I don't even know how they keep the lights on honestly, but they but the heart in them, and there's nothing to say bad against the big churches. My church is a big church. We have 3,000 people that go to my church. It's
Mm.
huge, but I also, because I partner with all these small churches, I've been going to their services to like, show support, to just go and talk to them, to just check in. Because to me, it's not just, I need your church for this and plug you in. It's a
Mm.
relationship. We are now in relationship. I go out to lunch and dinner with these pastors. Like we have a friendship now. And I
Mm.
want it to always be that way. I don't just want you to come and play for me and then, go your own way. So,
Mm.
but I go to their services and there's so much heart in them, and I cry more in their worship than I do at mine. And the band at my church is like, I mean, they could honestly put out an album and do incredibly well. They're so
Mm.
so talented. But
Mhm.
I go to these small churches, and like the one church I go to, they don't even have a band. They essentially sing like karaoke almost, because they don't it's a small building, they don't have room for a band,
Mhm.
for like instruments. And I cry every single time because like there's just a different energy in the room, and they
Mm.
to them, they all know each other, and they all show up to each other's like baby showers, and they live in community together, which is I think what God or Jesus intended when he built the church initially with his disciples and told them, like, you need to gather, you need to commune, you need to eat dinner together, you need to do life together. That's what they're doing with 3,000 people. You can't do that. They put us in
Mm.
small groups, the life groups or whatever, and that's fine. But then you only know those like 10 people,
Mm.
and you don't want to leave your small group because then people are going to think you don't like them. But but there's so many. I mean, I've been going to my church for 10 years. There isn't a single pastor at my church. Well, there is now, but there wasn't until this started that even knew what my name was.
Mm.
So I mean, I don't know. That's just like it. There's a weird difference, and like some of the big churches, they won't even talk to me when I try to get them to join us for these events. And I'm like, it's free for you. You plug and play. It's easy peasy. Like, come and hang out with us. Like, come down from the mountaintop and hang out with the people. And but they won't even call me back, respond to emails. They want nothing to do with it. Where these little churches are kind of glad that someone's even giving them an opportunity, because typically they get ignored.
Mm.
And it's such a shame because they have so much heart and they are so giving of themselves. So I think that's what I've noticed just since doing
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of pros and cons to
Yeah.
either side. A lot of churches are too small to do most, if not all, the things they want to do. But then on the other hand, you have the churches that are larger missing out on some of the basics, it
Yes.
seems.
Yeah.
Uh, has that led you to consider joining a smaller church?
Over the last year, I've thought a lot about it because
Mm,
initially, like, I was kind of hurt that my church didn't show an interest in what I was doing, didn't want to participate. Um, and I experienced church hurt for the first time, and I was having such great relationships with these other churches, but it really came down to, that we are actual members of our church, and this is the family that we signed into,
mm,
and joined. So I don't believe in walking away from your family, and every family is going to have its faults and its shortcomings. But what I think this allowed me the opportunity to do was to sit down with my pastor, one of my pastors, and say, this is something I don't think that I think you have room to grow in this area. And as someone who has been coming here for 10 years, I'm giving you sort of like audience feedback as to like what I think maybe there's room to go over and to try to like modify some things.
mm,
And they'll take it or they won't, but at least like I spoke my piece and I feel at peace with that now. So their expositional teaching is bar none. They have an amazing pastoral team. The worship
mm,
is amazing. Like I said, they're incredibly talented. They have a great kids ministry and amazing programs. So
mhm.
there is a lot of benefits to the particular church, but at the end of the day, we committed to this church family, and so unless they ask us to leave, I don't think we'll be going anywhere.
Okay. Well, that commitment is laudable. I would encourage you that um, you describe church as family, and generally, family should know your name.
Yeah, they should. Well, I'm going to be a part of them. Hopefully, learning a lot of names.
Yeah.
They actually just invited me to join them for an outreach dinner. So they're actually now starting to potentially like involve themselves with Light the Way. So
Mhm.
hopefully, by doing that and bringing them in and having them, because we always have meetings before our events, like we at least do one or two where we
Yeah.
gather all the churches and have them come to somebody's house, and we eat together and we just talk like normal people. And they now, a lot of the churches that partnered with me before, like they have their own relationships outside of me, and they show
Mm.
up for each other's events and they get dinner together, and they get to know people. So hopefully,
Yeah.
like, this will be a good example to them that, hey, you don't know who's sitting in your congregation and what God has planned, for them to do. And, don't overlook like the people, because I'm one of 3,000 amazing stories in that church,
Mm.
so maybe it'll encourage them to open their eyes a little bit.
Mm. All right. Well, I have just a few questions left for you here.
Sorry
Uh,
if I talk too much.
no, it's perfect.
Okay.
Uh, so, is there any books you recommend for, or resources you recommend for people who are considering trying to do an event like what you're doing, starting to do some sort of worship ministry like that?
I would love to know what some books are for that. um, now, honestly, I haven't used anything. I That sounds terrible. I mean, I use Canva for like the marketing stuff, so that's really the only resource that I've used. But really,
Mm.
I pray a lot about it. I use an app called Through the Word.
Oh,
Which has been really helpful for me. I'm a busy mom and I work 50 hours a week, so I only get very small amounts of time, but I want
mm,
my day to start with the Bible every day, so I can turn on, one of the chapters, and it does expositional teaching through the chapter, as to how it relates to life today, and then
oh,
it reads the chapter to you, and I'm able to like sit and think about it, and I go and I prayer journal
mm,
afterwards while I drink my coffee. I wake up
mm.
an hour before I need to, just to have time to do all that. Because it's important to like kind of start your day with that sort of intention. But as
Right.
for worship ministry, um, I I wish I had read books, because now we're trying to become a nonprofit organization and
Mm.
legitimize everything legally. And
Right.
I was doing the LLC paperwork yesterday, and I'm like, I have no idea what I'm looking at. And So I would say, for resources, more just grabbing people who are, surround yourself with people who know more than you do, and people who
Yeah.
are going to be honest with you, and people who are
Mm.
going to keep you like focused on God and on his word, so that they keep you humble the whole time, because it'd be
Yeah.
really easy to lose that in all of this.
Uh, and you said you're trying to start an LLC or a nonprofit,
So in order to get to do my events, I have to get insurance, and in order to
right?
get insurance, I have to have some type of like business entity. I would eventually like to for it to become a nonprofit, but I had to buy the name and like become something in order to get insurance. So until we can kind of slide it into a nonprofit business or nonprofit organization like a 501c3, like it has to be
Mhm.
something just so that I can have insurance. Relying on it, and we've been very blessed that Duneland Family Eye Care has supported us insurance wise so far for the two events that we've had, and they agreed to do the next round of events. But she's also a busy working mom, and sometimes you're like, I need this today, like I have to get this done, and having to rely on other people and putting stuff on other people's backs. I'd rather just put it on my own back, that way if something happens, it's on me and I'm responsible instead of somebody else too. So I
Mhm.
think reading a few books on how to get stuff like that started would probably have
Mhm.
benefited me, instead of just kind of like diving in and being like, I'll figure it out as I go, because it's really
Yeah.
complicated.
Would you like a couple recommendations?
Yes, I don't have a
Yeah.
pen though, so I will get those from you on Messenger, because
Yeah.
you can give them to me verbally, but I'll have you send them to me too,
Yeah.
because I don't have anything around me right now.
It's take it with a grain of salt because I haven't really done it yet, but I've been talking to a lot of people who've started churches and things. Um, it is a lot harder to change an LLC to a nonprofit than it is to start a nonprofit.
Okay,
Um, and I don't think so. The total cost of starting a nonprofit should be about $300.
well, that's not bad.
If you want to do like with a lawyer, tax filing, all that, it can really add up. But in theory, it should only cost you around $300. Um, that's my understanding. Grain of salt, of course. And then if you do that, there's a lot of fringe benefits to having a nonprofit to consider, as far as like the cost of doing that versus an LLC to start, such as grants.
That's why we
Like,
wanted to do it. We wanted to be able to
yeah.
apply for grants down
Mhm.
the road. And maybe it's what I did. I used a tool called Zen Business
Mhm.
to sort everything out. But from my understanding, I thought it was becoming like an LLC as far as the like getting the name. But again, it's a
Like,
lot to take in. But yeah.
yeah. So like Canva, for example, I don't know if you're using the free or paid version, but with if you have a nonprofit, you can get Canva for free.
Oh, that's cool. I use the paid
Yeah.
version right now. It's not really that expensive, but the program's awesome
Yeah.
for creating stuff.
So that's just an example. There's a lot of like those little things that like you might already be paying for that like kind of offset the cost.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's good. I mean, good to know. You really we had planned on kind of putting that off. We were riding on the 501c3 of one of the churches that we partner with, and
Hmm.
they were kind of just like, because for park rentals, it's a huge difference if you're a nonprofit for the rental cost. So we
Right.
had been kind of using their 501c3 to rent the parks,
Mm.
because they're with us on all of our events. And I would like to, just have my own, because that, they, not that I don't want them with me on my events. I want to always have them with me, but I hate asking people for things, because then they think that that's the
Yeah.
only reason you want to interact with them, is so you can get something from them. And I'm like, if you give me absolutely nothing, you're not getting
Yeah.
rid of me. I'm the glitter of friendship. I will
Yeah.
always be there. So, but yeah, so we kind of just did that in order to get insurance, but I don't think that we really researched it probably as much as we should have. We were just like, we need insurance now. This event is in March. We got to get it done. So we kind of just had to pull the trigger on something. But if we have to close out the LLC and do it the other way, I mean, it's the long way and lesson learned. But I think we did what we thought we had to do.
Just a couple random thoughts from
Yeah,
someone
no, I
that's
should have watched all your podcasts
yeah.
first.
Uh, I do know this next week I'm interviewing someone who does a worship ministry as well. So when
Oh,
I interview
cool.
them, I'll make sure to send you the link to that.
Yeah, where
It's
is theirs?
over. They're in. I want to say they're in Colorado, and
Oh,
it's a worship pastor in Colorado has a ministry there, and then also runs um, a anti-sex trafficking company nonprofit in Argentina.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I wanted a an anti-sex trafficking nonprofit to be at our event, but there's really none here locally. I mean, there might be one in Chicago, but it's hard to get them to come out here, even though it's only an hour away. But I saw the after seeing Sound of Freedom last year, I was like I want us to find a way to support what these people are doing because I just like I as someone who has a 5-year old, and it's just it's terrifying, especially this area. We are right by the Canadian border, you know, close to big cities. You know, kids go disappearing all the time, and it's terrifying. I mean, you have small kids too, I think,
Yeah.
so sure
I
you
agree.
understand. Yeah.
Um, okay, so where do you see the light the way going in the future?
Well, I mean, like I said, the immediate future I see for next year. I made a connection with someone who does tent services, so 24 to 36 hour tent services. So that was a dream of one of my church partners when we first met and did our first event. He told me, you know, how we were wrapping things up after the evening, and he's like, "I've always wanted to do a 24-hour service." And so that always stuck in the back of my mind, and then sort of randomly met a pastor in Illinois, and he's connected to David's tent, and he was telling me about his tent services, and I'm like, that's interesting, like how random to come up to somebody, you know. So God has sort of planted that idea, and sort of a person who, even if he can't help me, but he could sort of guide me through how to do
Mhm.
that. And then um, a couple of our nonprofit partners who are now on my board, they got picked to do to be the directors of a housing facility for people leaving prison to like reacclimate into society through
Mhm.
Behind the Wire. Do you know Behind the Wire?
No, what is that?
Joey Lawrence was in a movie about a pastor, Pastor Scott. It was
Okay.
about like he was like a career criminal who went to prison and became a pastor afterwards. Anyway, there's a movie about him. So he started a group called Behind the Wire. They got picked to work for him, these people that I have worked with. And so I jokingly said to them, um, like, oh, let me get into like, do you think you can help me get into the prison? I think we should do like a worship thing at the prison. And they're like, that's an amazing idea. So they brought it up to him during a meeting, and they said that they did them before COVID but hadn't done them since. And I was
Mm.
like, well, maybe it's time to start again. And so I feel like sometimes I don't even think about the things that are coming out of my mouth, that God's just sort of like speaking on my behalf and
Mm.
just is like, this is what we're going to do. And I'm like, yeah, you know, I don't want to go into a prison,
Mm.
but he has his own plans. We were also looking at going to Austin and doing
Mm.
one in Texas.
Okay.
My best friend happens to live over there, and one of our people who came in to our events last year, she moved out that way, and she's like, I've been scouting churches and scouting parks. I want you to bring it here. You know, it's
Mhm.
very low production, very stripped down worship. It's not going to compete with some of these other worship concerts where they have the lights and the lasers and the TV LED screens and all that stuff. Like, we don't do any of that stuff. We have sound equipment, you know, to get it out there, but it's very minimalistic as far as, you know, production goes. Um,
Mhm.
and so I kind of like that about it, and I don't necessarily want that to change. So um, I was offered the Sun, Moon, and Stars recently to get all that stuff, and
Yeah.
I just felt like I was being tempted to get bigger than for it to turn into a show instead
Mm.
of genuine worship. So as long as I don't mind if it grows, that God grows it, but I want to keep it humble and focused upwards and less on production and more on what we're doing. So we'll see
Mm.
what God's plans are. My
All
plans
right.
don't really matter.
So if someone wants to find you or donate to your ministry or go to one of the events, where do they find that information?
So Light the Way is on Facebook. That's probably the best way. It has an LTW, kind of like what you see on my shirt here, as the picture. That's our logo. So because I know there's like Light the Way, like I think there's like a Light the Way lighting company or something in somewhere. So look for the logo. But our Facebook page has all of our information, and in some of the saved groups on top, we haven't really started accepting donations. We haven't set up a business account. People have donated to me personally
Mhm.
on Venmo, and they've just like messaged me to donate. But we are just now, like I said, setting up all that stuff for them to be able to do that. But we are selling tickets for $20 to the gala at Valparaiso University. We're gonna have a silent auction from 4 to 5. We have some really great items in there. Baseball tickets to the White Sox and Revival Fest tickets. So there's some really great items donated. But other than that, we post up when all of our events are happening on our page, and then we make Facebook event invites. So anybody who wants to come, we'd love to have you, and find me and say hi, because I'm always
Yeah.
wandering around. We all have our Light the Way shirts on, so
Mhm.
easy to find somebody. Somebody knows where to find me.
Yeah. So, do you want to give out your Venmo information?
I can post it on your Facebook page. I didn't know to say that, but you can find me Kathleen Meisberger. I don't my phone number is 219-771-9105. It's probably dumb to put your phone number on the internet, but if anybody wants to call me, I'll talk to them too.
We're still pretty small.
Yeah.
I'll put the information in the description. So,
Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. I didn't know I was going to need that, but I was still
no,
kind of
you're
like,
good.
why would people want to give me money?
I think that this is really going to be going places, and I want to check in
Oh,
like a year or further and just see where God is taking it because I see real potential in what you're doing.
thank you. That's awesome. I hope so. I mean, everybody else seems to be saying the same thing, and I'm kind of, it's hard for me to wrap my head around that I'm even still doing it at all, because, but God He really seems to pick some of the most random people and unlikely people to do some of His best work. I mean, He could have come here as a king, as a leader, as a rich person, and He didn't. He came as a poor nobody, born to poor nobodies, and he was the I mean, He's the king of the universe. He's and He surrounded Himself with like prostitutes and criminals and people who are traitors to their people. I mean, he did not surround Himself with the high and mighty and the church leaders. He just was like a regular guy, and He used regular people to do extraordinary things. And I just feel so grateful that He saw something in me that seemed worthy. People just don't want to give their yes. They don't
Mm,
want to. They don't want to sacrifice and their worldly things
mm,
and take the time and wake up that extra hour or use their lunch break to do all these things. They'd rather kind of hoard their time and hoard their money. But this is such
mm.
a blip, all of this time. And when I get where we're going, I really want God to look at me and say, like, good job, you know good job.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Lena, for coming on the podcast.
For having
Uh,
me.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
All right.
I'll let
I
you
don't know how to sign out of here, so I'm going to leave that to you. Okay. Bye. Thank you.